Today we're going to learn how to get started with React. We'll start by going through the basics, then some more modern stuff like hooks, and we'll build a real project along the way. By the end, you'll have a solid foundation on React so you can start building your own projects from scratch. You don't need any React experience for this course, but some JavaScript and some ESX knowledge will help. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we have to do before we start React is install Node.js and install an IDE. Today we're going to be using Visual Studio Code, but you can use any IDE that you feel comfortable with. So if you open up Google and search for install Node.js, and it should be one of the first links if you just click on that, and it gives you a couple of packages or installers to download. Since I'm on a Mac, I'm going to download and install the Mac OS version. If you're on Windows, you can click the Windows one, and after this downloads, I'm just going to open it. And it brings up this window, which we can use to install Node. So if we just jump through all the options and agree to all the terms and all that stuff and continue, and this should install. So I have this installed already, so this should be quite fast. Okay, cool. So the next thing we want to do, we'll just put that in the bin. The next thing we want to do is make sure that Node installed correctly. So if you open up a terminal window and type node -v, it should give you the version. So as you can see, we're on version 12.16.3, so that's fine for this. Now that Node is working, we can go ahead and install Visual Studio Code. So again, if you go to Google and search for install Visual Studio Code, it should be the first link. So it's code.visualstudio.com/download. And again, it gives you a bunch of options. I'll download the Mac version, and it gives you some tips on how to get started and all that sort of stuff, extensions and such. We don't need this right now, so we'll just wait for it to download. If you open this, it gives you the application, so you can just double click on this and it'll open. If you want, you can move it somewhere else outside of the downloads folder, but for this it should be fine. So if you double click on this, it should bring up our IDE, and that's everything ready to go. It gives you the application, so you can just double click on this and it'll open. If you want, you can move it somewhere else outside of the downloads folder, but for this it should be fine. So if you double click on this, it should bring up our IDE, and that's everything ready to go. Okay, so now that we have Visual Studio Code and Node.js installed, we can go ahead and start a React project. So the good thing for us is that the engineers at Facebook have given us a command that lets us quickly start a React project. So all we have to do now is open a terminal, and if you navigate to where you want your projects to be, I'm just going to put mine on the desktop, and type npx create -react-app and give it a name. So we're just going to call this my app, and hit enter, and you should see all this stuff starts to happen. So basically what's happening here is that it's going off and downloading all the packages, installing all the packages, and setting everything up nicely so we don't have to manually add all these scripts and add webpack and things like that to the project. Now that that's finished, we can see some commands have displayed here, which tells us what to do basically. So if we follow some of these commands, so we will just do cd my app and do yarn start like it says down here. We'll do yarn start. This should open up your browser, and this is opened up on my other screen, so we'll put it over here so we can see. And as you can see, this has started. So it's added everything to a development server for us at localhost 3000, and it's given us some boilerplate code, just this nice spinny thing here, and it tells us to go to app.js and save and reload. Now it's time to open up Visual Studio Code and open up our app that was just created for us. So if you open up Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to move this off to the left so we can still see our app. Move this guy over there and this over here. Okay, cool. And if you go to open folder, and if you go to wherever your app was created, so mine's is in the desktop, and you want to click the top level folder here. So even though it shows you some other stuff, we want the top level one. And if we click open, and let's close down the welcome message, and here we are. So our app has appeared in the IDE, and this is the folder structure. So for this tutorial, we won't be worrying too much about the majority of this stuff, but it's good to understand what's going on. So let's quickly go through all the folders in this application. So at the top we have the node modules. This holds all the packages and third-party libraries that our app's going to use. If you open it up, it's got a bunch of stuff that React app gives us. We don't really care too much about this right now. Just know that anytime you add a package to your project, it appears in the node modules, and that's it really. The public folder has a bunch of stuff that you might be familiar with. So it's got an index.html, it's got the logo and things like that. So when we run a build command, which you'll see later on, our app gets packaged and gets converted into CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and those files get dumped into this public folder. This folder is what you would typically put on a web server if you wanted to host it on the web so that people can see it. If we continue on, you'll see the source folder. So if you expand this, this is where the code lives. So as you can see, there's a bunch of CSS, there's some JavaScript files, and then some other stuff. The file that we care about the most is going to be app.js. So if we open this up, so as you can see, it's given us some boilerplate. So this is the stuff over here. So the other nice thing about Create React app is that it's got a feature called hot reloading. So if I change this in the editor to hello React and then some other stuff and save using Command S or whatever, you can see that because I've got the app running still in my terminal, and I changed the code and saved it, it appears straight away. So this hot reloading feature makes it very fast to develop React apps. So back in our app.js file, we have a function called app that returns some markup. So that's all a component really is in React. It's just a function, plain old function that returns a bunch of markup that gets rendered on the screen. So what we're going to do here is we're going to delete everything. So if you just select all and press delete, and we're going to build up our own component from scratch here just to understand how everything works. So the first thing we have to do is import Reacts from React. So this tells the compiler and tells the browser that this app.js file is going to be a React component. Next, we're going to declare a function. So we're going to use ES6 arrow functions here, just to make things a bit cleaner. As you'll see with different things going forward, ES6 arrow functions make things really nice and easy to read. So we're just going to declare a constant called app, and this is a function. And then lastly, just to fix this error, is we're going to use the export keyword to export our app so that other components can use it. So as you can see now over here, it's complaining about not being able to just make this a bit bigger so you can see what's happening. Yeah, so nothing was returned from the render. This usually means the return statement is missing. So if we jump back into our code, we have declared a component. It's called app. We've exported the component so that it can be used in other places. And since this is the main component, this is the first one that loads. So if you remember, a component in React is just a function that returns some data or some markup. So we have to do that. So in our app component, let's type return, open some braces, and we'll add a space. And all we want to do is add div, and within that we'll say this is my first React component with a capital H here. And there we go. So that's our first React component in a nutshell. Okay, so if we look back at our app component, you might be curious about this. So this looks like HTML and it's inside of a function, and you're probably thinking, whoa, this is all very confusing. Even though this looks like HTML, it's actually not. This is JSX, and this is shorthand for React creating elements behind the scenes. So this div, or this div with text inside it, can be written as react.createElement, and it's going to be a div. It doesn't have any props. Don't worry too much about this right now. We're only explaining what happens under the scenes. And then the children is going to be, this is my first React component. So let me drop this stuff onto different lines so you can see. So we have replaced our div with this new create or React.createElement thing, and if we save, we can see that it's the same thing. So this is what is happening behind the scenes anytime we write div, or a div element rather. What React does is it goes and creates an element. So it's similar to how in JavaScript you would manually create all these different elements and put them inside each other. This is the same thing, just React is doing it for us. So React creates the div. It doesn't have any props. Props is something we'll talk about later. And the children is simply this text. So what we can also do is add different elements in here using React.createElement. So this looks quite ugly. It's quite hard to follow. Don't worry too much if you don't completely understand. But the main thing to remember is this div isn't HTML, it's JSX, which behind the scenes looks like this. And the reason for this is, oops, we just put our text back in and get rid of the apostrophes or the quotations. So the reason why we do this is because it's much easier to read. It's very similar to HTML, which is what web developers and JavaScript developers are accustomed with. And it saves us having to write all this ugly looking React stuff. So let's delete that and save, and we're back to where we were before. So this is the common way to write JSX. So just like with normal HTML, we can nest components in here. So if we delete this and put in a h1, which is a title or a heading, and we can say hello React world. And if we want to add some more, we can put in a h2, and this is my first React component. And if we save this, our hot reloading will kick in and we have a bunch of text appearing on the screen. So at this point, you're probably thinking, why do I have to use this JSX thing? What's the point when it looks like normal HTML anyway, and React just creates HTML elements behind the scenes, so I don't understand the point. Well, that's a good question. So by using JavaScript within the HTML, it makes it really easy to make dynamic components that are easy to follow and easy to find out where things are happening, like on-click, event listeners, and so on. So for example, if we wanted to make this text a bit more dynamic, all we have to do is create a variable. So we'll call it const const title, because that's what it is, equals, and then open your quotations because we're creating a string. And all we're going to do is cut this text and paste it within here. So now we have a string that's assigned to this title variable. So now we could take this title and add it within our pitch1 tags by opening curly braces. Notice that the curly braces have turned blue here. So this means anything within these braces gets executed as JavaScript. So if I paste in this title and I save, you can see that everything stays the same. If I update this variable title up here to say this is dynamic and save it, this gets updated. So what's happening here is we have created a, let me just put this down so you can see all the text. We have created a title variable that has a string and it gets rendered within the JSX. So if we didn't have these curly braces, the JavaScript wouldn't execute and the actual word title would appear. So it's important that whenever you want to add your variables and such to JSX, that it is added within the curly braces. So in the same way, we can add event listeners. So if we take an on-click event, so in our h2 tag, we can say on-click equals, and then again, we'll open our brackets. And this is similar to the on-click events that are used in normal HTML. So when the user clicks on H2 or our H2 component, which in this case is just this text, it will display a alert on the page that says something. So the on-click property here takes a function. So we're going to use an arrow function, which looks like this. Just open your braces and use the fat arrow syntax. And then all we want to say is alert, and you clicked the message, or yeah, whatever, that's fine. Okay, so now if we save this, and if we go back to our browser, and if we click the message, it says you click the message. So all that's happened here is we've just added an on-click event. So anytime the H2 is clicked, it runs this function. So that's the power of JSX in a nutshell. It lets us easily add dynamic things and handle events and such inline, and we don't have to jump between different files and figure out, okay, so where's this being called from, or how's this being handled. It's all straight here in its own little component. Okay, so now that we have an idea about some basic React, how to create components and how to make things dynamic, and JSX, we will create a contacts list application. So what this will do is it will display actually, if I show you a finished example, that would be good. Okay, what it will do is display a contact card. It'll have a person's name, email, it'll have their profile image. It will have a toggle edge button which shows and hides the edge. Okay, so let's jump back into your IDE. The first thing that we want to do is go into app.css and delete everything. So Control A or Command A and delete. So the CSS is available at a link that should appear at the top of the screen. If you go to that link, copy everything and dump it into app.css. So all this does is gives us the style for us. So just some simple contact card styles, the contact text, and a button to show and hide the edge. Now we're going to jump back into app.js and we're going to delete. Let's delete everything inside the function for now. So if we delete that, and we're going to start with a blank component. So let's start adding in some markup. So if you type return, open our braces as before, and we're going to type div class name. So if you remember, this is JavaScript, and class is a reserved word in JavaScript. So if we want to add classes to our HTML, we have to use this class name. So don't forget this whenever you're creating your own apps and components. So if we jump back to our finished example, we'll see each thing here is its own card that has its own data. So we'll start by creating one and adding some hard-coded stuff in here just so we can see what it looks like, and then after that we will make things more dynamic by rendering from a list and all that sort of stuff. So the first thing you want to do is add a class name to this card div, and we'll call it contact card, which is the name of the CSS we just copied in, and add some space in here. So this is going to be the blue bit. If we jump back here, this is just going to be the container for this card. So back in the code, then we want to add an image, and we're going to take a placeholder image from the web. So if you do HTTPS and it's via dot placeholder.com/ and then it's going to be 150, and we will close that. And what's this complaining about? Image elements must have an alt prop or blah blah blah. Okay, let's do that. So alt equals it's profile image profile. Let's just call it profile. Okay, so we'll drop some of these properties onto a new line so we can see everything. And we have our image. Let's save it like that. Oh, formatting issues all over the place. There. Okay. Okay, so you can see the image has appeared, and that's cool. So let's do the next thing. So the next bit is going to be a div that holds the user details. So if we jump back here, we have our image off to the left, and then off to the right we're just going to have a div that contains all this stuff here. So back in our code, open a div class name equals, and then this is going to be called user details. and in that we're going to have a p tag which holds the name. For now we're just going to hard code some stuff. It'll be Jenny Han, and let's do another one which is going to be for the email. jenny.han@notreal.com, and the last thing we have to put in for Jenny is her age. So age, she's going to be 25. So if we save this, hopefully everything appears, and it does, but our styles seem to be all over the place. Oh yeah, so we haven't imported the style sheet. So our style sheet is in the source here called app.css. So all we have to do is do import at the top. Is it single quotes, and then just do dot / app.css and save that. Hopefully that fixes everything, and it does. Okay, cool. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, since we know that this contact card is going to be used a few times, we want to create our own component from it. So currently everything is in our parent app.js, but what we can do is extract this bit, so the stuff that we know that we're going to be reusing, and put it in its own contact card component. So to do that, if we go to our source folder and add a new file, we'll call it contact card.js, and within that we want to do import React from React. Did I get that right? Yep. And then we want to declare a function called contact card. So it's always a good idea to call your JavaScript file the same name as the component. So we've called this contact card.js, and we've called this contact card as well. And it's going to be an arrow function, and we want to export default contact card. And now if we go back into app.js, we want to highlight all our JSX, so everything from the top div right down to the bottom, and we want to cut and go back into contact card and paste that within the return brackets. So if you type return and open some brackets and paste this in and save, this will disappear because we get unexpected token. That's okay for now. So now that we have our contact card component, how do we use it? How do we bring this into our app component? So because we've exported this as contact card, that means that we can import it from our app. So if we go into our app.js, and at the top we'll do import contact card from, and it'll be open your single quotes and do dot / contact card, and that will pull in the contact card from our contact card file. And down in our JSX, we just call this as we would any old HTML or JSX element. So we open our angle brackets, type contact card, and close it. So now if we save, hopefully everything appears, and it does. So what's happening here is we're rendering the contact card which we've just exported. So if you think of this like a stamp, that's a good way to think of your components. So whenever you add this component into your JSX, it gets stamped on the page and the same markup is displayed. So if we copy and paste this a few times, we'll put this inside a div just so we can keep it nice and organized. And then if we save this, you can see, then if we just fix our highlighting, don't know what's happening with my formatter thingy. So if we save this, now we have 3 components on the page, and all that does is each time you call that component or render it within your JSX, it calls this markup and just spits it out onto the page. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, if we look at our finished example, we have a button that toggles the edge, and we currently have the edge shown. So let's add some stuff in that hides the edge. Okay, so this is a good time to talk about state. So if you have been reading about React, you might have come across this term state. So what is state? It's basically stuff that can change on your UI. So when I say stuff, it can be objects, it can be arrays, it can be variables. So anytime something changes in your UI, it's a good idea to put it in state. So let's have a look at how we can use state to show and hide this age text. So if we go into our contact card component and take a new line at the top of the function, and let's declare a variable called const, and we're going to open our square brackets and close them, equals useState. So this is a React hook which we have to import up here, so we can open our curly braces and do useState. So this is called a React hook. This lets us declare our own state variables which we can use on our own components. Inside our square brackets here, we want to write show age, comma, and set show age. So this is what the hook gives us. If you're familiar with ES6 stuff, this is called destructuring assignment, which means anytime we call a useState hook, it gives us two things: a variable that we can hold our state in, and a function that lets us change the state. So we can also initialize the state by passing in a value to the useState function. So in this case, we want to initialize our showAge variable to be false. False. Don't worry if you don't understand exactly how this works or how destructuring assignment works right now. All you have to know is that anytime you call useState, it gives you two things back: one that stores a state variable and a function that changes it. Right, so now that we have our state variable declared, how do we use it? So down in here, we are about to see how JSX can really help us out. So if we take a new line and open our curly braces, so remember, anytime we have curly braces inside JSX, this code gets executed as JavaScript. If we didn't have this, it would just display text or it would break. So in here, we want to use the ternary operator to display the age if the show age value is true, and if not, we will just return null, which means nothing will be displayed. So what does this look like then? So in here, we will do show age, take a space and add a question mark, and then we want to cut this entire line here, so the p tags and the text, and we'll paste it in here, and we'll get rid of that gap. And just before the closing curly brace, we want to take a space, add a semicolon, and then type null. So what this is going to do is it's going to check, okay, is show age true? If it is true, it's going to display this, and if not, it's going to display nothing. So as you can see over here, the age has disappeared because show age has been set to false initially. If we set this to true and save, the age will appear. So again, all it does is check if the condition is true. If the condition is true, it runs the stuff to the left of the semicolon, which in this case just displays a paragraph tag and some text. Otherwise, it's just going to return null, and that doesn't display anything. If you're interested in changing this to make it a bit shorter and get rid of the null, we can change this to be show age and double and then get rid of this altogether. So all this means is if show age is true, display this, else display nothing. This is a nice wee trick if you want to conditionally hide or show things based on a true or false flag. So we'll leave it like this for now. But if you want to leave it the other way, that's perfectly fine. Right, so we have a state hook which is holding the state of if our age is being shown or not. So how do we change that? It doesn't make sense for us to go in and constantly change true or false anytime we want it to be displayed, so we'll have to do it in code. So what we can do is add a button that changes this state variable to true anytime it's clicked. So how do we do that? Let's go into our contact card.js, and just underneath the email, we want to add a button, just a plain old button tag, and we will say show age. show age. So hopefully now this appears on the page, and it does. At the minute it doesn't do anything, which is okay. So now if we think about what has to happen, if we click show age, we want to change the state to be true. So we can do that by calling this function the set show age. So let's do that. Again, if we go down into our button, if you can remember that JSX gives us access to loads of event handlers, one of them being on click, equals, open our curly braces to execute this code as JavaScript. The on click property takes a function. So we open our braces and use a fat arrow to say that this is a function, and what we're going to do is, if I can get rid of that, we want to call this function. So from down in here we can reference this just like any old variable, just like we did with show age. We can reference this within our JSX. So we want to say set show age, and since this is a function, we open our braces and we want to set it to the opposite of what it currently is. So we want to say set it to the opposite by using exclamation mark and a show age. So anytime this is clicked, this button's clicked, it's going to call this on click event handler. The event handler is going to run this function, and it's going to set our state variable by calling this function, and it's going to set it to the opposite of what it currently is. So if I click the button and it's currently false, it'll get set to true. If I click the button and it's currently true, it'll get set to false. So if we save this, and if I click on show age, it appears. So there we are. And if I keep clicking, it disappears and shows, disappears and shows. So one thing to note here is that even though we have 3 contact card components on the page, if I click on show age, this doesn't affect any of the other contact card components. So this is a good thing about React components, is that any data or any state is completely isolated to each individual component, even though it's called 3 times. So each of these components don't know about the other one. So if we talk in detail a bit more about what exactly is happening here. So even though we click this button, how does things change? Like, why does this suddenly appear? Whenever we click the button, it calls the set show age function to change the state value. So anytime you change state in a React component, it causes the component to render. So what that means is anytime the JSX changes this stuff inside the return statement, the JSX gets re-rendered on the page. So anytime I click the button, it changes the show age to true or false, and since the state changed, this is going to re-render with the new value. So the second time this executes, this is going to be true, and if I click again, it's going to be false, and so on. So anytime the state changes, the app re-renders. So this is nice so far. However, all our data in these contact components is hard-coded. In contactcard.js, we have a hard-coded name, a hard-coded email, the age is hard-coded, and so on. So how do we make this even more reusable? Well, React gives us a thing called props, which are data that you can pass to a component that initializes it on its first load. If we jump back into app.js, you can see we have our 3 contact cards. So to declare a prop, we give it a name firstly. So just inside the closing angle brackets, if we say name equals, and open your speech marks, and we will say Jenny Han for the first contact card here. So we're just going to copy this data, and instead of hard coding it, we're going to pass it in as prop. So the next one will be email equals what do we say, jenny.han@notreal.com, and we'll put these on a new line so we can see what's happening. And we will do age equals what age is Jenny again? 25. So we'll say she's 25. And we also want to take the image. So let's copy this source here, and we will put it into this component as a prop as well. So we'll add it to the top, and we'll say avatar URL equals this. So I have put these properties, I've put these properties in as strings, but you can pass any type of property in that you want. So for example, instead of passing in age as a string, I could pass it in as a integer value. But as you can see, this starts to break. So what we have to do is, when you're declaring a prop, it either has to be a string or it has to be a JavaScript thing. So to make it a JavaScript thing, it has to be within our curly braces, remember. So if I wrap the integer in curly braces, everything works. So I can pass other things in too, like I could pass in an object, but right now we'll keep it simple and we'll just pass in some strings and this integer value. The key thing to remember is props, you can call whatever you like, they can hold whatever you like. If it's a string, it doesn't need the curly braces. Anything other than a string, then you have to put it inside the curly braces. Okay, so just going to copy this contact card with the props and replace the other two with different details, just to show you how things change. So the second person will call Paul Jones, Paul.Jones at notreal.com as well, and we will copy it again, paste it one last time. Name, let's call this guy Peter Pan, and this will be peter.pan at neverland.com, and Peter Pan is, what age is Peter Pan? 100. Okay, so now we have 3 different components and we're passing in a bunch of props. So now that we're passing props down from the parent to the contact card component, how do we use this within the contact card? Well, if we go back to contactcard.js, you can see nothing's changed over here. Everything's the same, it still shows the hard-coded data. That's because we haven't told it to take the data from the props. So to do this, we go into our function parameters and type props. So React gives us this property object, automatically passes it into the contact card and all your components. So all your components accepts this props, and all the props that you defined at the start here, so avatar URL, the name, the email, and age, all get dumped into this props object. Let's show this by doing console.log, and we'll just type props. So let's open up the DevTools here, and we'll pop this guy out so that you can see what's happening. Make it bigger. Is that big enough? Hope so. And if we look at one, you can see the object has our age. This is the last one. Our age, avatar URL, email, and the name. Okay, so if we close that down and jump back into our contactcard.js, and we'll get rid of this console log, and now we can use the props object to get the data that we want to display here. So use the dot notation and our curly braces just to execute things as JavaScript. So if we remove the name and instead we'll open our curly braces, and we will type props dot name. So now if I save this, you can see that the name has changed from Jenny Han to Paul Jones and to Peter Pan. So this is coming from the prop that we declared in app.js when we created the contact card component. So it's coming from here. This is the exact same as this name. Everything gets bundled into this props object, which we can access using the dot notation. So if we do the same for the rest, let's get rid of the avatar URL and we'll do props.avatar URL, I think it is. And oh no, it's broke. What happened? Is that, oh, capital possibly? Yeah, so you have to make sure that this is the exact same as what you declared at the top level. So if we continue, we'll do props.email, save, and that should change. Yep, Peter Pan and Paul Jones, and we can do the same with the age. So we'll just delete that and do props.age. And if we show that's 25, I think everybody is 25. Oh, Peter Pan's 100 for some reason. That's okay. So that's how you can make use of props to make reusable components by passing in the data and rendering the data dynamically in your components. Okay, so this is looking good so far. We have a bunch of components. Each component is reusable. It's got some state happening, different data coming in, and all sorts of stuff going on. So the next thing to do is if we jump back to app.js, this isn't what would happen in a production app. In a production app, you might get the data from an API somewhere. The API will return an array of objects. So that is the next step that we'll do. So in app.js, at the top level, create a variable called contacts equals an array. So if you just open up this array and open up a new object. So we're going to pretend that this data has come back from an API for now. We actually will call an API later on in the tutorial and show you how to do it that way. But for now, let's take it one step at a time. So our first object, or each object rather, in this array is going to be a contact. So it's going to have just the details. It's going to have all the data that represents a contact card. The first thing is going to be, let's do the avatar URL is equal to this. And yeah, it's not equals, it's dot, because we're creating an object, and an object's going to have a bunch of properties. The first one is going to be avatar URL, email. Okay, so we'll just drop everything down. Email is going to be, for his first person, it's going to be Jenny.han, and just before email, we'll put in the name. And the name is going to be Jenny Han. And age will just be 25, so age 25. Okay, so we'll copy this a few more times for the other two contacts that we're going to represent here. So comma, inside our contacts array, just copy that object again, and we'll change just the name to Paul Jones, which we're just going to take from down here. And the email is just going to take that as well. And we'll change Paul's age just so we can tell the difference from Jenny. He's going to be 33. And the last guy is going to be Peter Pan. Let's chuck his details in here. And what's his email address? Peter Pan at Neverland. So chuck that in there, and Peter is 100. Okay, so now we have a list of contacts, and each item in the array has an object, and each object represents a contact details. Let's see if this, okay, so let's pretend that we've just done an API call and we've gotten this object back called contacts, and it's got all this stuff in it. So how do we dynamically display a contact card from this data? Well, we can use the map function for that. So the map function, if you can remember from your JavaScript days or your JavaScript learning so far, is that it iterates over an array and performs an action on each item in the array and returns a new array at the end. We're going to use the map function to iterate over our contacts array. For each one of these objects, we're going to create a contact card component, and that's going to return an array of contact card components at the end, and then React will display that automatically. So hopefully the code isn't as complicated as it sounds, because there's lots of things done for us by the map function and React. So let's jump down into our return statement here in our JSX. After the div, we'll take a new line, open up our curly braces to execute some JavaScript. So we'll say contacts dot map and open the braces. So contacts is just the name of this array up here. The map function accepts a function, so we'll declare an arrow function. And whenever you declare a function inside map, it gives you two things. So it gives you the object that the iteration is currently on, so we'll call this contact, and it also gives the position that it's on, so that's the index, so we'll call it index. And just before our closing bracket here, we'll open some curly braces and we'll take a new line so we can see everything nice and cleanly. Okay, so now let's take one of these contact cards and we will copy that, and in this we want to return a contact card item. So if we type return and then open your brackets again and paste this in, and we'll just indent this a wee bit. Okay, so now if we go down and we'll delete these for now. Actually, we'll comment them out in case we need it. So we'll comment this out and then we'll save. As you can see, it's displaying 3 contact cards, and the reason it's doing this is because there are 3 items in our array and the map function runs 3 times. If there was 4 items, it would run 4 times, and so on. So the details are all the same, and that's because we haven't dynamically changed the properties. If you look, we have, even though we're passing in props, the details are all the same. So this return map thing is going to run 3 times. It's going to return the same data. So if I change this to something else, it's always going to be the same, Jenny Han. Okay, so the next thing is that we need to dynamically populate the props. So if you can remember, our .map function always gives us the current contact that it's on. So within this, it gives us the object. So the object has a bunch of stuff in it. So all we have to do is take these objects from the current contact that the map is currently on, if that makes sense. So if we go into avatar URL and open our braces and type contact dot avatar URL, that's going to take it from here, and we'll do similar for the rest. Contact dot name, contact dot email, contact dot email, and we'll do this contact dot age. So now if I save and run this, you can see the data is coming from up here. The first time it runs, it's going to see the first object. It's going to create a contact card component. It's going to take all of these details and it's going to pass them in as props down in here. So contact.avatar URL, contact.name, contact.email, contact.age. The second time it runs, it's going to do the same for the next one. And the third time it's going to do the same for the last one. And that gives us 3. So if we wanted to add a 4th person up here, all we have to do is add a 4th object to our contacts array, and we'll call this Lisa Simpson, and let's just give it an email, Simpson at springfield.com, and her age is, I don't know what age she is, 13. And it dynamically appears down here with an age of 13. So this is a very powerful approach to creating React apps. Anytime your data changes, it automatically gets rendered down here because of the way that we're using the map function. We can go and add things as we like up here and delete, and this automatically updates. So we'll put that back. One thing to note about the map function is that we can call this whatever we want. So instead of contact, we could call it person, and you can see now that I can't find contact, but if I change this, oops, whoa, what happened there? Okay, let's close that down. If we go back up to where we were and just paste person in and save that, everything works the same. So these things can be called whatever you want them to be, but it's always good to name it the singular of like the name of your array. So I've called it contacts because there's many contacts, but each one is going to be a contact. This approach makes it easy to follow your code and understand what's going on. So we'll change all these back to contact and keep it like this. Why do we need to pass in this index? Well, if we look at the dev tools, it'll probably be complaining about something. Yeah. So let me make this bigger. So each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Check the rendered method of app, blah, blah, blah. So basically what this means is that since I'm iterating over this contacts list and creating a bunch of components, each component needs to have a key, which is defined like that. And key is equal to something. So the key helps tell React what's changed. So for example, if we have 4 components, but the name changed of say Jenny Han to be something else, then React will know only re-render the first component in this list, as that's the only one that's changed. The rest haven't changed, so don't waste memory by re-rendering. It's quite a clever thing, but that means we have to put in a key. So a key can be whatever you want, it just has to be unique. So a good approach is to take the index and just chuck it in here. So like the key is equal to index, and if we save and refresh, everything stays the same. I just inspect this to see if our message is gone, and it is. The index changes every time or changes on each iteration, so it's going to start at 0, so the key will be different. I think we can actually see this in the console. I could be wrong. Yeah, okay. you can't, but basically each one of these things has their own key that isn't displayed as HTML, but React uses it internally just to keep track of each of these items. Okay, so close that one down and we'll jump back into app.js. Okay, so now we have our data rendering from a list. It's a good idea to pull this data from an API to show how an actual app would handle getting users and contacts from an endpoint and displaying that data as contact cards. For this, we're going to use a free API, which is called randomuser.me. I'll put a link in the description. But if you go to Chrome, paste in the URL, so randomuser.me/API/ and hit enter. This is what the response will look like. So if we go to the actual website just by taking out API, it'll show us a bit better. Here we go. So here's our random user generator. It gives us a bunch of stuff which we need. So we need the avatar URL of the person, the person's name, the email, and we choose a password. That's not a very safe password. And the age which we can get from the object. So if we scroll down, it explains a bit on how to use it, and it shows a bit clear as to what the response will be. So if we dig in a bit more, we can see we've got the name object, which is what we're going to need. The email object, we're also going to need that. The date of birth object gives us an age, and a picture gives us a bunch of different sizes of images to work with. So that's great. That's everything we need. So if we go back to our code and we will go into app.js, let's delete all this comment stuff that we don't need anymore, just to keep things clean. And what we're going to do is we are going to, just below this contacts array, which we will delete eventually as it's dummy data, but we'll keep it there for now. So just below here, we want to use the fetch API to go and get the data that we just looked at. So if we do fetch, open your speech marks, HTTPS, and it's going to be randomuser.me/API and close that up. Then we'll do that then, since the fetch returns a promise. And with the data that we get back after the promise has resolved, we want to convert it to JSON. And again, that then after the JSON conversions happened, we want to, what will we do? Let's just console log it for now. So if we log the data out to the screen or to the console, just to see what it looks like. Okay, so just to recap on what's happening. So we're going to go to randomuser.me/API and we're going to fetch some data. Then we're going to pass on a function that takes the response that we've just got back. It's going to convert that to JSON. Then we're going to take the data that gets returned from the JSON response, and then we're going to log that to the console. So if we save this, nothing's broken. Let's have a look at the DevTools again. And in our console, we can see object. And if we open up the object, we can see the results. It's got some other stuff that we don't care about. Don't care about info right now. Expand the results, and it's only giving us one. So we can change this to return, if we return a couple. So let's close this down, and I don't know what this is. So if we go back to our randomuser.me, and hopefully it'll tell us somewhere how to request more than one result. Documentation is probably a good place to start. Results, requesting multiple users could be good. Yeah, okay. So if we go and request multiple users, random generator, yeah, I can fetch up to 5,000 generators, users, blah blah blah, parameter, passing in the results parameter. Okay, so and it tells us how to do it nicely here. So let's copy this and go back to the code, and in our fetch we will paste this in. This has been very lazy. I could have just typed it. And results, we'll just do 5 results, just so we don't overkill things. So now if I save this again and inspect the DevTools again, console, open up the object, and this time it's giving me 5 results. And if we open this up, we can see we've got 5 random users, or contacts rather. And if we expand the first one, you can see we've got a bunch of different data that's come back with that. So our date of birth, our age, email, the name, etc. It's all in there. So that's worked. So we've successfully called an API and gotten the data back. So let's close this DevTools down again. Now it's a good idea to save our data into state. So if you can remember back, the state objects are a good place to hold data that can change. So our results list can definitely change. So it's a good idea to stick this in state. So if we go to just above the fetch and type contacts equals, const open square brackets and contacts, comma, set contacts equals useState, and this will be initialized to an empty array. So if we can remember back, the useState hook gives us a state variable, and it gives us a function to update that state variable. So the reason why this is complaining about contacts is because it's been declared. So if we comment out the old contacts, just for now in case we need to refer back to it and save, so it's going to say useState is not defined. So that's the first problem we have. So let's import it. useState from React. Okay, and now we have a blank screen. So what's happened? Everything's broken. Well, if we look, we have a state object that holds a list of our contacts, but it's empty for now. Whenever this map function runs, it sees, okay, well, the contacts array is empty, so I don't have anything to render, so I'll just render nothing. Eventually, what we're going to do is take the data that we get back from the fetch call, and we're going to set this into state. Whenever we put this in state, this causes a re-render, and the map function will run and spit out all the contact cards in the format that we want. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to change where the props come from. So previously we had our own array that had our own data, which had a bunch of properties, but now we've changed it to call an API. So the API is a bit different. If we look at the response again, let me see if I can keep this open so we can easily see what's going on. So in the console, you can see we have an object of some results, and within the results, the shape is different to our own shape that we created when we were just playing with some dummy data. So we have to change this slightly. Whenever we save this results to state, each object is going to have a contact much similar to how we had it before, but the avatar URL, the name, the email, and the age is going to come from somewhere different. So if you can imagine that each of these results is a contact, so the avatar URL is now going to come from picture, which is down in here. So actually, let's change this so it's a bit easier to follow. So instead of calling this contact, let's call this results, as that's what it's called here, and then we'll call this set results. So now down in here, we're going to iterate over the results, and we're going to call this result. So now we need to just pick out the things that we need. So the avatar URL is going to come from picture, which is going to be result because we'll be on the first one. We can do result dot picture dot, and then we'll take the large picture. So as you can see here, well, it's given us I can't show this because it's not letting me scroll over, but it's given us a URL to some guy's profile picture. So let's take that one. That'll be dot large, and then we do the same with this. So result dot so result, and the name is going to come from the name. So we'll just take the first name for now. So result dot first name, or first, sorry. So this has to match this kind of shape, and we'll take the email from result dot email, and the age we'll take from result dot dob dot age. dob.age. Okay, so even though things currently still aren't rendering because we haven't saved the result of the API call into state, the code should work when it eventually renders. So all we're doing is we get this results array back that has 5 objects, We're going to save the results array to state. The map function is going to iterate over the array for each of the objects within the array. In this case, it's going to be a contact or a user. It's going to have a bunch of details. So for each one, it's going to go into that object and it's going to pick out the different bits of data that we need from the different objects within it. And it's going to do that 5 times for each of the contacts that we received back from the user API. Okay, so now that our JSX has been changed to match the shape of the result object that we're going to get back from the API, we can save the data to state. Let's do that then. If we go to our then function and take a new line here and here, let's do set results. It's going to be able to data dot results. So we'll just close down our dev tools before we do anything, and then we'll click save. And as you can see, we're getting we're getting back our 5 results, but it seems to be stuck in some kind of endless call. Okay, so you're probably thinking everything's broken. This is terrible. We're so close to finishing, but it's not working. The reason that this is happening is because of the way React re-renders. So let's just stop this for now. It's making me a bit dizzy. So if we stop that and save, remember back to what's going on. So when we do an API call, the data gets saved to state. So whenever the state object changes, this is going to re-render the component, which does the API call again. Once the API call happens, it saves the data to state, which triggers the re-render, which calls the API, and so on and so on. So that's where the loop comes from. So the way to fix this is by using what's called the useEffect hook. So this allows us to run certain parts of code at different points in the React lifecycle. So for example, if we only wanted to run some code when what the useEffect hook does is it allows us to run different functions at certain times in the React lifecycle. So for example, if we only want some code to run when the component is loaded, or if a state variable changes, we can tell useEffect to do that. The first thing to do is import useEffect from React. So useEffect like that with a capital E. Is it useEffect? Yeah, okay. So useEffect. It's a hook that comes from React. We don't have to create very much ourselves. So just above the fetch function in app.js, we want to type useEffect, open some brackets, and useEffect takes a function. So we'll do an arrow function and open our curlies. And within this, we just want to paste our fetch function. So before we go further, let's see what happens. And if we uncomment our set results, so things are still happening, and you're probably thinking, what's going on? I thought this was supposed to solve all our problems. Well, useEffect by default runs every time the component re-renders, so it's still doing the same thing as before. But to tell useEffect to run at the start when the component loads for the first time, and only the first time, we pass in what's called a dependency array. So this is the second parameter. The first parameter is this function, and the second one is just this dependency array. So now if I save, it only does the API call once. So how has adding in an empty array solved all of our problems here? Well, the useEffect hook will always run when a component is loaded for the first time. So adding this dependency array, it contains the list of things that say, okay, if these things change, then the useEffect hook has to run again. Because this is empty, it doesn't have anything in it, so there's nothing else that can trigger the useEffect hook to run. So it only runs the first time. The first time it runs is when the component loads, it goes off and gets the data, and it saves the data to state. This gets saved in our state variable called results. The results state change will trigger a re-render, but because this has run already, it won't run again. The API is only called once. So now over here, we can see we've got a bunch of random users back. Because we asked for 5, we got 5 users back, and it should show our age. And it seems to be missing the name. So let's have a look and see what happened. So we have result.first, which might not be right. So if we inspect our DevTools and go to our console, so we're still logging out the data here. Let's just see what's wrong. So we have our 5 results. That's good. And we have 5 objects. If we have a look at the first one just to see what's going on. And oh, I forgot to put the name in. So the first string is within the name object, which I forgot to reference. So if I close this down and do result.name.first and save everything, it shows the name again. So yep, and it shows a bunch of people. It shows their ages, it shows their email. So if I refresh this, it's going to call the API again because the app's loading for the first time again, and it's going to give us back a bunch of different people. So if we go back into our code, if we change the results to be 2, and if we save, the app will load again and it only gives us 2 people back. And if we try 10, it will give us 10 people back. Just to recap before we finish up, we have let's delete this comment then, and make everything nice and tidy. Okay, so just to recap again, so we have a state variable which holds the results. The results get set to an empty array initially, and we have a useEffect hook that gets called when the component first loads. It does an API call, it gets some contact users back, it converts everything to JSON. That data then gets set as the results. We can see the shape of the results if we look at our console, and inspect the objects, so we can see where the different bits of data are coming from. This gets set into state. Whenever we change the state, React re-renders. It won't get the API data again, as it's got it once already, and this empty array tells it only get the data the first time the app loads, or this component loads. Then down in here, we have a map function that iterates over the results state array and pulls out just the different objects as props. So we take the picture, the first name, the email, and the age from the results object that we got back. We pass that to the contact card. In the contact card, nothing's changed because the name of the props themselves haven't changed. So we dig into the props variable, or object rather, using dot notation, and spit out just the different parts that we need using the curly braces.